So we've got four this week. As I said last week, I'll probably see The Girl in the Spider's Web sometime in the middle of next week, and probably The Grinch somewhere in the next week or two, out of morbid curiosity, if nothing else. So in the meantime, we have these four, which are a pretty decent batch, minus one. So we'll go ahead and start with Overlord. This is another J.J. Abrams produced movie with some sort of cryptic advertising, at least at the start, which caused a lot of people to think maybe this was another Cloverfield movie. But and you may sort of get a bit cynical in regards to him denying that, and it's like, yeah, but usually when they deny something, that usually means it's definitely true. But no, this is in fact not a Cloverfield movie, so we're good to go. Um, it actually, still though, is probably not exactly what people might be expecting from it, especially when you're promised like this B movie Nazi zombies sort of thing. It's actually it's like so it's one of those cases where if it's like sort of the meshing of two genres, you would say like if you like how this is like a zombie movie but also a war movie, and you would sort of brush it off when you say when somebody would say like oh, it's actually more war movie than zombie movie, and you just, yeah, okay. But no, that's actually kind of true this time. This is actually like 85% war movie, which is not a bad thing at all. um, when it starts off, we have this plane sequence that feels basically like it's the opening of Predator, more or less, with the sort of the soldiers just talking to each other, and we sort of get to know them through that before all shit breaks loose almost immediately. And the sound is absolutely insane. Like I know it's playing in IMAX, and I can totally see why. You could tell like one of the speakers went fuzzy somewhere in the movie because it couldn't handle just how loud it is. Um, and then obviously we start off with this plane crash sequence. That's the very first scene, and you'll probably get vibes of like with Abrams' name attached to it. Even if he's not directing, it'll still probably give you vibes of the train crash in Super 8, complete with projectile vomiting, just like that as well. And this whole opening sequence isn't it's not even just the crash. Like this eventually turns into a sort of a skydiving is I use the term loosely, but it is like with all the fire and all the planes shooting at each other. It's like this. It's like you're basically watching him fall into hell, more or less. And there's going to be a lot of that throughout. Also, like it might seem maybe a bit heavy-handed or like really in your face about it, because they seem to go in that direction a couple of times, but they use it in an effective way, in like a very foreboding way. Like when they first get to the ground and they see what appears to be like a dog decomposing on the ground or something, or it's just really fucked up, and one of them suggests that it could be a jackal, like Satan's dogs, and then and the whole thing is they have to basically blow up a church because there's a tower and the Nazis are using, and when they go in there, you see like all the Jesus statues and the crucifixes and all that just like on the ground, and it's like this sort of like hopelessness, like there's no God here, basically. As I said, after basically watching him descend into hell during the plane crash, so that might seem a bit heavy in it, but it actually does work in the context, especially with the fact that this is like incredibly well shot. And so and that's another thing where it might seem a bit like, where like you got the shots of like the bodies hanging from the trees with the fire in the background and all that, and I talk about the fact that it's probably an hour or so into the movie, or at least a little before an hour into the movie, before it turns into what people probably think the whole thing is. So it's like, but it's still technically a horror movie, I guess, because they basically portray war in the same vein you would portray a horror movie. I know that's like my first day of film school portrayal, but it's still, they do find a way to make it work. And that's also helped by the cast. Our main character here is I forgot his name then, and I keep forgetting his name now. The kid that was Denzel's kid in Fences. And we also have Wyatt Russell as the one that's kind of running this whole thing. Wyatt Russell in particular is, I mean, I always kind of have liked him up to this point, especially with like Everybody Wants Some, but he's like really kind of growing into his own thing where it's like, you see him in a movie like this and he's got like, you know, his dad's facial structure and he's definitely got his dad's voice. And this definitely seems like a movie his dad might have been in the 80s, but he still kind of manages to do his own thing and sort of create his own character with you being able to focus on that and not just, oh, well, this kind of reminds me of Kurt Russell quite a bit. I do really appreciate that. And then, as I was talking about, though, with the foreboding, and not just necessarily like a sort of religious theme or whatever, but there's also a lot of intensity. Like, when I say it's almost an hour in, when it turns into the movie people think it is, that is not at all to say that this movie is slow. The movie still feels like non-stop, and there's a lot of really great stuff. Um, as there are with, I'm trying to think of a more tactful way to put this, but I guess we'll just say Nazi movies, where you have scenes that sort of set up, like, it's the sort of scene that we've seen plenty of times in movies like this, like when you hear the sirens or you hear the people walking around in The Diary of Anne Frank, or obviously the opening scene of Inglourious Basterds, I'm sure will come to mind. We get a nice long scene of something like that that uses that kind of suspense, like long before it's a horror movie, if you will. I mean, there's one character that's like lurking around behind closed doors that gives you that horror vibe already, but in the meantime, we've got the whole Nazi thing going on, and it actually works really well, and it sort of gives you that unnerved feel before it actually turns into, you know, the gore fest and all that. Um, but that's not to, even when it is a gore fest, that's not to, like, you know, tear that side of the movie down at all. It's very creatively gruesome, and just kind of all around crazy as hell. And it doesn't do like, I know one problem I think I heard some people had like early on, like after early screenings, was the fact that despite the concept, there's not a lot of self-awareness going on. But I kind of like the fact that it just sort of, because when you live in like a post-Sharknado world, it's like, because of movies like Sharknado, you can almost lose your credibility by being too self-aware. And I think the fact that they had the balls to just commit to what they were doing instead of trying to like fall back on, oh, in case this looks ridiculous, we'll add some self-aware stuff. They like fully commit to the concept, and it actually comes through and actually ends up working out for them pretty well. And I think adding any sort of, you know, blatant self-awareness to it might have been, I mean, surely, you know, behind the camera there's probably self-awareness, but in the movie itself it's not really that present, so, and I think that would sort of give it a vibe that would kind of kill those more suspenseful moments and the more effective moments if they tried to be too, you know, embracing that side of it. So I'm actually kind of glad they didn't go that route. Like I said, even though the concept like really suggests that's the direction you would go, they managed to make it work pretty well. So movies like Dead Snow exist already anyway, so that would have been, you know, already traveled territory anyway. So the to kind of take it in this more serious tone, I think ultimately works. And it's well made enough too that it doesn't need that either. Like, so from the sound to the way it's shot to, you know, actors like Wyatt Russell here, there's plenty going for it. We've also got a really good villain too, like that main Nazi dude that they have. Yeah, you'll just see it. Um, and and so that's really where I stand with this. It doesn't really. It is one of those cases where it also could have probably felt a lot like other movies, like a cross between Dead Snow and Inglourious Basterds or whatever. But it very much. I think Julius Avery is the name of the director. He definitely has sort of his own style here, and it's talking about not necessarily Cloverfield movies in general, but J.J. Abrams produced movies. I sort of feel about him now the way I felt about Dan Trachtenberg after 10 Cloverfield Lane, where it's like, Abrams really has this way of assigning these directors to these movies, assuming he's, you know, completely the one, that really kind of makes you, it's a really great jumping off point, and it really makes you want to see where these dudes go, and this is definitely one, I think, I can't remember exactly what it is, but I remember seeing a headline that Avery's already got like another job after this. So that'll be great to see. So yeah, I had to kind of rush through this one. The next three you're gonna see were like already pre-shot this morning. So but yes, this is really good stuff and gets to be really crazy as hell and really gruesome and really awesome, but also kind of takes its time. But it's also kind of not taking its time because even when it's not, a zombie movie, it's still like got a whole lot to offer in a really big way. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this. So we'll leave that at this and move on. The next movie is going to be Outlaw King, the next thing from Netflix, which also is getting a theatrical release along with their next few, like The Ballad of Buster Scruggs and Bird Box and a few of those. And this is another one that was kind of victim of what I was kind of talking about last week with Hunter Killer, where it's like, I wasn't really sure how I was going into this because I'm just kind of not into the genre itself, just in general. But being the reteaming of Dave McKenzie and Chris Pine after Hell or High Water did give me a little something. And lately I've liked a lot of what Aaron Taylor Johnson's been doing. So, yeah, so I wasn't completely pushing it away sort of in the way that I was Hunter Killer, unfortunately. Though it did have apparently a very rocky start at TIFF, where it was like 20 minutes longer. It had, like, I think, like, what, 3 different battle scenes or something, and a chase scene is what I heard, and a scene where Pine's character, Robert the Bruce, actually meets William Wallace at some point, where we don't see him at all in the movie, except after the fact. And you kind of think that, especially with a lot of movies we've been getting that just seem to be, like, endless battles, and the movie may still seem that way to some people, but it does seem like that it is a reasonably trimmed down movie. Like, you can kind of sense this was probably longer, but not really in any way that's all that negative when you think about the reaction, especially that cut got. Apparently, when Mackenzie was sitting in on it and kind of reading the crowd, he pretty much instantly knew like what had to go as he was watching it back with them. And it was like this whole excruciating long process of sitting through the whole movie just knowing like immediately what needed to go and what the audience was sitting through. So knowing that going in I think helps a lot probably. So it does feel like that a lot more care was put into it in that sort of second round as it comes out here. I think he even said that he has like no personal connection anymore to that first cut like at all. So that does sort of come through, though. There is this thing you probably heard about, the long take at the very beginning, the opening scene, really. And it's a long take that's like 8 or 9 minutes long. And it's like, I sort of go back and forth on how I feel about the long take. I think sometimes it's showy just for the sake of being showy, but it can also be amazing if it's done right. Here, I think it might, especially being the first scene, I think it may be one of those takes that draws a little too much attention to itself because the camera is like, for most of it, is constantly moving and spinning around the characters and all that, and it's like it's so easy to tell that's what's going on when the better long takes are sort of seamless in how you see them that way, because he also started with a long take at the beginning of Hell or High Water when it was building up to that first, during the opening credits and all that, or just before the opening credits. And that one was a lot more like subtle and fluid about it. And you could sort of you were seeing things from a different perspective on the outside of the building and how these things were coming together for this little heist they were about to pull off. And here it's just like, it just really feels like a show-offy thing that's sort of like, you just kind of, you don't mind the long take if they would just let the camera sit fucking still. It would probably have a lot more of effect than it does. But as is, it just feels like it's sort of, I guess, making a spectacle of itself. There's, like, in this take, King Edward says something like, "Gentlemen, we have a spectacle." And it's like, no shit, you're showing it off in this take, and you have been for the past 6 minutes. But still, for a movie like this, it is sort of an unexpected way to open, I guess, because you sort of expect, I mean, you do get, like, some of the text that sets the history that you'd expect in a movie like this, but then you've got this thing. I see where it could have worked, but I just think in the way it's executed, it wasn't really for me, so But then it gets going, and there are a bunch of characters that start to come into play. We've got a villain, the Edward II, and then we've got his wife and Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, and it sort of seems like there could have been a risk that there's too many characters, but they really do stand out enough, and it may seem a bit redundant in the middle there, where it's like, after he's killed John Coleman and people, it's basically like this long array of him just running into people that are like pissed at him for that, and how he deals with them individually in those groups. But I still think that there is something good here for sure, particularly when the Aaron Taylor Johnson character comes in, that first scene when they think he's going to be like this huge threat. And we also sort of get that vibe because we've seen like how like off the rails the character can go as far as his sanity. But we also learn in this scene exactly what drives him and the way he basically like pledges his loyalty and wants to basically restore his name status and all that. And then from there it becomes a really interesting character to watch, even if maybe for a lot of the time he's like he's just kind of there as part of the group, but he does get to go off the wall crazy many times. I saw like one or two comparisons that compared his performance to that of John Cleese raiding the castle in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I can't tell if that's a compliment or not. It's probably saying he's too cartoonish and over the top, but as hilarious as that is, and accurate as it is, I still think it actually works in the confines of the movie without him being too... Because you hear something like that, and you hear how his performance is kind of, big and blood-drenched and all that, and it kind of seems like, yeah, he might go a bit over the top, especially if he's bringing in his character from Nocturnal Animals a little bit. But not really. I feel like he actually kind of fit in pretty well, especially in the battle scenes. He's got a great moment in the last battle that I love a lot. Sort of like an almost Muhammad Ali moment, only within this battle in this particular era. And it's not without humor, interestingly enough. There's only maybe like 2 or 3 scenes, and it is, in context, seems sort of out of nowhere. But it's still kind of welcome in this story that's just got so much, sort of all the, blood and the carnage and the guts, literally. You'll just have moments like after they're married at the beginning and Pine leaves almost immediately, and one of the servants says, well, that was quick, and the woman says to him, you would know, or something like that. And it's just like, it's sort of unexpected in the moment, but I'm not mad that it's there or anything. There's also the when Aaron Taylor Johnson's like, fraternizing with one of the guy's daughters, so he chooses him when he is basically pantomiming how you should kill somebody, and making it known that that's the reason why. So it's a movie I didn't expect to have humor, and it's only there for like maybe a couple of scenes, but it doesn't stick out in the way you might think in a movie like this, so that was kind of a relief. And the great thing about it also, when I was talking about the way he decided to cut the movie, I'm not sure what else, if there was any more like character stuff that was cut in that 20 minutes, but there is some stuff where you can kind of imagine it expanding a little bit, like the John Goodman character, for instance, especially since how big of a deal he obviously... There's like so much history there with that character alone. But I think in those scenes I was talking about where he runs into all these people afterwards, and like you can see the ripple effect of how that confrontation ended and what it causes, and his whole exile and all that. It really shows that it was all about what's relevant to the story, when they really could have branched off in so many different directions with so many different characters. But he really found like the one storyline he really wanted to go for, and just anything that's irrelevant to that is expendable, no matter how rich it might have been, regardless. But and just that, and basically using that to show how all the other characters view Robert the Bruce as our central character, I think works for the most part. So, and as I've been saying, there's also, obviously it's got a very vivid brutality to it, but there's also makes you remember that Dave Mackenzie also directed stuff like Startup and stuff like that. But there's also the sort of love story between him and his wife, which might seem like one of those things that's like expendable in any other movie. But it actually does a few things here. It feels grounded enough to where, like, when we actually see them interact and, like, their admiration for each other, even though it seems like they've more or less been, pushed together, there is something sort of here, especially with the chemistry between them. But there's also, like, I mean, yeah, predictably, of course, but it does also serve to, like, raise the stakes in the middle, too, in a very obvious way, but even so, because they established it so well before, it does do that job, even if we see it coming from a mile away. So, um, and obviously it's got, obviously with this, big, it's probably something that suffers being a Netflix movie, I mean, obviously they're doing the small theatrical release, but most people are going to see it through the Netflix service, so that it might suffer there. It's probably something that looks a lot better, bigger, because it does, like when I watch movies like this, I often have the problem of not being able to, like, really get into it. Like, I sort of just see big sets and costumes as opposed to the world. And I think the small screen is, like, really probably brings that out more in a way that the big screen probably doesn't. Um, but it still has some really nice grand shots and does have, a nice big feel for the most part. In particular, the scene where they're ambushed and we see the fire arrows raining out of the sky. Not that it's not necessarily a shot that we haven't seen before, but it's still very well executed also. And then, yeah, we do have, even though I'd heard that, like I said, a lot of that 20 minutes that was cut was more battle scenes, it does, like, there are two battle scenes in this that are pretty much almost consecutive. But it never really feels like too much, like a lot of these movies with a lot of battles do. I think that has a lot to do with, not just with, the character work they've done up to this point, but just the way it's all put together, where it doesn't necessarily just feel like everybody's just sort of smashing together. Like, you see, like, every individual death and, like, every individual blood splatter in this mountain of carnage. And it's really well executed. That final battle is, like, incredibly well staged. And not only that, but it's sort of eventually, of course, whittles itself down to this one-on-one confrontation we've, like, really been waiting for, and it's short-lived but still satisfying as a whole. So yeah, and so I do get also where Mackenzie was coming from, where he was saying that he didn't really want to do, like, another Braveheart. Like, apparently Braveheart isn't seen as, like, the best thing, like, as far as, Scotland viewers go, but and he didn't really want to do it in that. I think he described it the raw way that Braveheart is. He said he didn't want to make that, so I can kind of see that, but I think it's gonna get comparisons anyway from most people. But yeah, so I did take to this probably more than I thought I did, but I could also see where people could have problems with it. It might seem maybe a bit generic for the genre. And maybe there's, as I've said many times before, if there are, like, liberties with history, it's a movie, it's, and especially with this era, people will be much more likely to take liberties, I imagine, but, so what any of those may be, I knew, like, a little bit, going into this, but, nothing to where, or nothing particularly like that stands out, positive or negative, so yeah, I'm fine with this, but it'll be interesting to see how, especially since I know, like, critic scores and stuff like that are kind of uneven now, because I think a lot of them are still talking about the TIFF reviews, which would probably be significantly different when they see it now, but I don't know for sure, so we'll go on to the next one, if we absolutely must, which is the Nutcracker and the Four Realms. The first thing you might notice that's really weird about this movie is that two directors are named, and while that's not entirely uncommon, it is pretty uncommon that it's two directors that not only do we actually recognize, but do two totally different types of movies. Because we've got Lassie Ostrom, who did, the Side House Rules, and Chocolat, and My Life as a Dog, Hachi, a bunch of things. And we've got Joe Johnston, who did, the original Jumanji, Captain America, Benicio del Toro's Wolfman, Jurassic Park 3. It's like you can see where there's going to be... I mean, you can kind of see where a meshing of those two might work. And it's to my understanding, Johnston was pretty much in charge of reshoots because Hellstrom couldn't come back for one reason or another. But still, I could see somewhere where these two could mesh for a Nutcracker movie that's a Nutcracker movie like the one they were hoping to make here. So it is another one of those, this is not the story you know bullshit or whatever. That was really popular for a while there that kind of looked like it might have been dead, but they tried to bring it back here. So they're giving it the Burton's Alice in Wonderland treatment, they're giving it the Snow White and the Huntsman treatment. There's a little Narnia in there. Weirdly enough, I was also getting very vague vibes of Scorsese's Hugo, like just a little bit. But yeah, they're gonna obviously throw armies into it and all that stuff. But that makes a little sense, because unlike a lot of the stuff I mentioned, the Nutcracker is, like, known already for having battles in it, or at least a battle in it. So it at least makes a little sense here, but just when you know the layout of the movie and the part of Disney it's coming from, you imagine what you see when you imagine what the battle in this probably looks like. Yeah, it looks like that. A bunch of shoddily animated shit just being thrown around. And speaking of shoddily animated, this seems to be one of those movies where a lot of people are saying, like, it's getting bad reviews, but a lot of people are saying, like, well, at least it's eye candy, or if only the story had matched up to the visuals, or, well, at least we've got some really creative visuals, and the visuals, and the visuals, and that's all people say, but it's like, I don't know that I saw the same visuals as these fucking people. This is like the fakest CGI this side of a fucking TV movie. The whole thing, the shots where you can tell, at one point they probably would have looked good. Only problem is the animation looks like it's not fucking complete. So I don't know. Like the opening shot, where it's like it's sort of, because as we talked about, we're basically doing Christmas in November at the movie theaters now. So if you want to get in that spirit, like there's an outline of it here, but overall, just everything just looks so... Like, I cannot tell what in this movie would not have been shot on a soundstage. I have no idea of anything at all. There might have been a set, but still, like, a set on a soundstage, where it's like this much set and this much green screen. And we've got, you know, it's also kind of frustrating because we've got Mackenzie Foy in the lead here, and when you see her in this, obviously she's the boring generic lead character that we always get in this, but you can, watching her, you can imagine her being the lead in a good version of this. Like, she could do that, even if this movie won't let her. And people keep popping in and out. We've got Keira Knightley coming in, doing God knows what the hell with her voice. Morgan Freeman is here as her godfather. He's got, like, the big hair and the eye patch, and the first time I saw him, it was like, oh, well, he's the bad guy, of course. Well, I was wrong about that. Morgan Freeman's not the bad guy, because apart from, like, one frame in the very last scene of the movie, this is all we get. Just this one scene at the beginning with him. And then Helen Mirren, who looks like she's gonna be our villain. Maybe I'm being a little loose with the spoilers here, but fucking look at this. Helen Mirren might be our villain, and when we first see her, she's like, well, it's like a giant robot, but then that's, you know, she's actually, there is a Helen Mirren and the giant robot. They, you know, coexist. But the thing was I knew Helen Mirren was supposed to be in it, and when I saw the giant robot, I was like, is that Helen Mirren's character? Because honestly, I wouldn't put it past the movie to do that right now. Just for that giant robot to be Helen Mirren's character. But there is an actual Helen Mirren here. She's covered in, I don't know if it's makeup or CGI or what the fuck it is, but it's not entirely Helen Mirren, unsurprisingly. So, because this movie can't do anything that even resembles something that's actually fucking there. And we end up with a lot of, like the soldiers, sort of like the soldiers that, the evil Tim Allen was making in Santa Claus 2. They're basically walking around, only instead of those, you know, fake-looking toy things, it's just really bad CGI. There are these, like, life-size sentient Russian nesting clown dolls that are, like, rolling around doing I don't know what, trying to look intimidating but really not doing a fucking thing. They're like out of Spy Kids or something. They're like out of Alan Cummings' show in Spy Kids or whatever is what they look like. Um, and so you think about the Nutcracker story and the whole ballet thing, and it's like they actually kind of try to shoehorn that in a little bit. Basically, it's just as an exposition machine, not really with any particular respect to the source material or whatever. There is like, and I suppose they are trying to do that at least in that one bit and like through the end credits and all that. But it's sort of like if you ever see like really any production of the Nutcracker at all. I saw one a little bit out of town a few years ago that was really damn good, and it's like once you see that, it's kind of like it's like that the really good thing that you kind of want to see. It's just sort of being blocked off by all the fake shit around it that's trying to be bigger. Or try to make it bigger, but only drawing attention to itself and how shitty it is. So I don't know where any enjoyment's supposed to come out of that, but whatever. And then eventually, once we reach about the halfway point, it's just going to be these endless action scenes as it goes on. I was talking about how they sort of get into, like, especially like Snow White and the Huntsman, where it's like only a matter of time before she's in some fucking uniform and she's at the front charge of a battle or whatever. Mackenzie Foy is in full uniform 45 minutes into this. That's how much of a damn hurry it's in to get to this stuff. And she's never heard of this place when the movie starts. She has no idea this other world exists when the movie starts. 45 minutes in, she's in fucking uniform. Honestly. So, and then once it gets to that point, it's just, it's like we can practically see her on the soundstage surrounded by the green screen swatting at nothing. It's pathetic, really. And I was kind of worried for a while this was going to be another one of those movies that I really had nothing to say about it, because all in all, it's just goddamn boring. It is so excruciatingly boring for, like, 99% of its runtime. And that 1% is trying to figure out what the hell everybody's doing. Like Keira Knightley. I don't... So, and, like, they try some things here, like the rats that pile on top of each other and make one creature. Though it sort of reminded me of all the Kevin Smith Bratzies and Yoga Hosers that all went into that one thing. And it's like, Yoga Hosers and Burton's Alice in Wonderland, it's like, were they just picking shit out of Johnny Depp's filmography and making this movie around it? I'm sure you can find some Sweeney Todd in here if you looked for it. So, yeah, I don't know what the point of this was. It's just, like I said, it feels incomplete, not just by the CGI, but also the fact that it's like they're trying to pile so much. It's only like an hour 35 or an hour 40, and it's like they're trying to pile so much stuff into something where you could write the basic synopsis on like a half of a Post-it note. But it feels like it's got so much going on and nothing going on at the same time. This is... I don't know what the hell this was, or why Morgan Freeman's in it for 30 seconds, or why Helen Mirren's in it for 40 seconds. I don't know. Richard E. Grant is, like, hidden behind icicles and shit. I don't even know why they bothered to get somebody of his caliber here, but... So yeah, I don't know. It just feels like a knockoff of so many things. None of which is the Nutcracker. I don't know. It was just, it's just bullshit, really. So let's end this on, the miseducation of Cameron Post. I put emphasis on saying that because for some reason I've been calling this the misdirection of Cameron Post since Sundance. But no, it's miseducation, so hopefully I'm the only person that was making that mistake. So, I mean, they both kind of fit, but yeah. The first thing you'll notice about this movie is, obviously it had all that buzz out of Sundance, and it was kind of the big thing there, but then, I wasn't quite sure what it was until, like, really late. Like, maybe a month or two ago, I learned what it was actually about. And we've got it, and obviously Boy Erased also going into the... similar territory. This one is set in 1993, which is interesting because it feels appropriate, but at the same time they don't really draw too much attention to that. Like, it's not one of those movies that, like, makes a whole bunch of references to the fact that it's 1993, and they don't, like... It's not even really trying to say, like, oh, look how bad we were in this era about this stuff. It's really just the setting. And it's this whole thing of... obviously, Chloe Moretz is a teenage girl, and she's living in this conservative town, and she goes to the prom with her boyfriend and her friend, who is the prom queen. And lo and behold, her and the prom queen get caught in the backseat of a car. And she's sent off to a gay conversion place called God's Promise. And this place is creepy as hell. Because we've got... First off, when you get there, and you start the whole program or whatever, you're a disciple. That's just what you're called. And they do this whole thing where it's run by Jennifer Ailey and John Gallagher Jr., who are playing brother and sister. And once you get there, he's there, and, like, your bags are, like, subject to being, you know, checked thoroughly. And he's got, like, the mustache and the tight button-up shirts, and there's just something so off-putting immediately about this. I mean, let alone what the place is in general, we already know that, but just the vibe once it's there also is, like, even creepier than you're probably thinking going in. And it's like you have to, like, earn these, like, God-approved privileges just to do certain things, like get mail. And then there's Jennifer Ailey comparing, like, she's trying to rationalize the way of thinking, so she compares gay pride parades to drug addicts getting parades for themselves. Whatever the hell that means. But the thing about this, though, is that they build this up, and they make, you know, like, the Jennifer Ailey character, like, as hateable as possible, but the way she goes, like, when Chloe Moretz says instead of Cameron, you can just call her Cam, but Ailey says that they're not going to do that because her name is already, you know, masculine, and that'll just, like, further add to her gender confusion, or something. And it's like, just everything about it is just so, like, skin-crawling, but at the same time, you probably think this is building up to it being, like, there's going to be some big sort of rebellion of sorts. And, like, Jennifer Ailey's going to get, like, what's coming to her or something, or, you know, get told off in some way, or change her mind on something, and it's not that movie, interestingly enough. But at the same time, the movie is satisfying enough, especially since it's so character-driven, that that's not really... These characters getting some sort of comeuppance for running this freak show of a place is not really what you're even focusing on by the end of it. You're more focused on the characters just reaching their particular goals and not necessarily trying to sort of hope the other people see, you know, any wrongdoing or whatever. The John Gallagher Jr.'s character in particular is very interesting because, as I said, I was making fun of his shirt and his mustache before, but it is revealed throughout in, like, every other scene. Like, every other scene that he's in or he's talked about, like, another layer about him is revealed. And he really does kind of become, like, this sort of tragic character as we learn exactly how he got to this point and how he got to this place and all that, and his relationship with his sister and all that. And we do have all these different characters here, like, but the thing about that is, we've got Sasha Lane from American Honey playing a character whose name supposedly is Jane Fonda. So occasionally it's that kind of movie. But the thing about the way these characters are introduced, is this interesting thing where John Gallagher Jr. shows that they have this picture of an iceberg, where they talk about how the whole homosexuality thing is just the tip of the iceberg, and they talk about all the other things in their life that may have led to this, that they physically write on the other side of this picture of the iceberg, and seeing every character's iceberg is how basically we're introduced to them, which is a really kind of nice, fluid way to do that. We do, and it is very authentic, these characters and their interactions and how we get to know them, and how we get to care for them too, but, you know, occasionally there's like the characters bond through singing cliche, so every now and then it goes in that direction, but for the most part, it does feel very fresh in how we deal with the characters and how some of them are a bit unpredictable also. But we do kind of grow to care for most or all of them, regardless of how they react to certain things. How some of them have been in the program for quite some time, so they're very much like her roommate seems to. We see the position that she's come from, and we very much sympathize for her. So we don't find it too off-putting, or it doesn't turn us against this character when she sees Chloe Moretz do something she shouldn't do, and her immediate instinct is, I'm going to rat on you. So the way they handle the characters like that works really well, and the way the conflict in general is just kind of approached, where it's, when you think about this place, and there's even a point where Moretz's character is being questioned about this, and it's like, and sort of about the shadiness of the place, but it's like, there's not really like a physical harm kind of thing like you might be expecting, like electric shock or some shit. It's like all psychological damage that's being done to them in these really just sort of deep-seated ways, and that's how it also really makes them a lot more sympathetic in that way also, especially as you see, like I said, how the characters react, even if before they came here may have been the opposite of what they were. And that also helps a lot with the performances, of course. Moretz in particular has to be like really internalized, where she's just as much a spectator as she is a unwilling participant in this. And she brings that through really well and makes the character feel like really real, to the point that we don't need to know a whole lot about like outwardly how she feels about what exactly she's seeing in order to sympathize with her or see where she's coming from. Just the physicality and the way she just can sort of react without even words kind of tells us everything we need to know about how dire she feels the situation is. It also feels like, I don't know if it's the presence of John Gallagher Jr. in my subconscious, but it feels very similar to Short Term 12 in regards to how the characters relate to each other, or the people around them, or the people in charge of them, but obviously just a very different setting and very different relationships, but a similar vibe nonetheless. Yeah, without saying too much else, that's pretty much what it is and what's good about it. There is, it's very engrossing and it's a very quick 90 minutes, and like I said, all the characters are, well, I guess disciples, if you want to, for lack of another word off the top of my head, are really sympathetic and really real, and that's basically the core of the movie, is watching them and how hopefully they'll somehow get out of this without too much permanent damage being done through the sort of unorthodox thing that this is, pretty much. And like I said, without going too movie-like, and like I said, not necessarily in the rebellion direction you might be thinking at the start, or that you might want. But as the movie reaches its end, it sort of guides you to what you probably really want out of it to give you a satisfying climax without you even maybe realizing what it is in that moment, the direction you want this to go. So that's really well handled also. I'm curious when it comes around how this compares to Boy Erased, whenever the hell I see that. Hopefully it's not too far off. And then, yeah, so that's going to be this one. Next week, I think next week is that Fantastic Beasts and Widows week? I hope so. So I have something to look forward to, and then I'm kind of getting really psyched for Widows now. The the more I hear about it. So yeah, and then of course 2 more verses. The next 2 verses are with my brother. Will be coming up, and some more of the blunt stuff. So all that. So until all that stuff, that's it.